Hello, friends. Welcome to the Feroz Sessions, where we have conversations to inspire you to live fiercely. I'm your host, Annick Magac, and today I have with me Dr. Julius, who is one of the most well-known, unknown people in fitness. Julius is a mindset mentor for many, many, many people, but he's primarily been very social and influential in the fitness industry. So welcome, Julius. How are you?
Great to see you, Annick. I'm doing well, thanks.
Yay! So I think probably the best part or the best place for us to start is giving a little bit of a background of how you came to be this basically mindset mentor, because I can't think of a better term to call you.
Yeah, I can't think of anything better either. People have asked, and I always go with whatever they say. So, mindset mentor is as good as anything, and I don't really know where to start as far as background, but I'll let me probably start with that I'm a cardiologist, and for me, when I went out into practice, actually just before I went out into practice, I'd wanted to be a cardiologist all my life, and so or a physician at least, and so I was trying to figure out, you know, helping people and all that. That's always a great thing. And as I got into medical school, I don't believe in coincidence. So the last week, literally the last week of my medical school, I saw this patient who came in. She was very sick. She was vomiting and had been sick for about 3 days. And I was, you know, she was obviously dehydrated and such. And I was doing a family practice rotation at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the attending physician asked me what I thought was going on. I said, I really didn't know, but we probably should put her in the hospital, give her some fluids and that kind of stuff. So we put her in the hospital, gave her some fluids, and we started doing some tests, you know, ultrasounds and CT scans and endoscopies, all these things. And nothing showed up. So she was in the hospital for about 3 days. And then on the third day, we looked at the CT scan. Everything looks fine. And she's feeling, you know, somewhat better, still a little sort of peaked, but she stopped throwing up. She's feeling better. And so my attendant says, well, why don't you go ahead and discharge her? I'm going to go back to the office and meet me there when you're done. So I said, okay, fine. So I go to discharge her. And as I'm going down the hall, I said, oh, wait a minute. And I turned around and I yelled to him, what should I use as a discharge diagnosis? Because when you discharge someone, you got to write a discharge diagnosis. And he said, oh, I don't know, just put viral gastroenteritis. So I said, okay. You know, so the first thing I learned that day was if we have no idea in medicine what's going on, we call it a virus. And then the second thing was when I went back to see her, I sat down and I was going over her discharge stuff, her instructions, writing out some prescriptions. And as I was sitting there, I, you know, was trying to make some conversation. So I said some corny thing like, well, you know, now we'll get you home where you can get some real rest because you can't rest in the hospital. And she said, oh, I wish. And I thought that was a strange sort of response. I said, you wish? I said, what do you mean you wish? She said, I wish I could go back home and get some rest. And I said, well, why can't you? She was about in her mid-30s. And she says, you know, over the past 3 months, she said, my husband left me, my dog died.
Oh, man.
And my house burned down.
Oh, gosh.
And in an instant, just literally in an instant, it was perfectly clear to me why she was sick.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I realized that, you know, that's each one of those is a big deal. And all three of those in a 3-month period of time was huge. And so, and my mind started racing because I realized that if I walked outside and I polled the first, I don't know, 100 people that walked by and told them that story, they would all sort of get it.
Right.
Right. Yet if I polled the first 100 doctors that walked by, they would probably say, what does that have to do with anything?
Mm-hmm.
So I saw this huge sort of disconnect. And the weird thing was, I said, well, if it makes sense to me what's going on, then, and I'm literally in my last week of medical school, okay, I said, I've got this whole library, access to this whole library. I don't even know where to go find information on this. I received no training whatsoever about it. I don't know where I can go to research it or find information on it. What's going on here? There's a disconnect. This doesn't make any sense. And so fortunately, it was the last week, because if it wasn't the last week, I'm not sure what I would have done.
Right.
But had I not even gone, it was actually the middle of the last week. I probably literally had 2 days left. And then, of course, things were very busy because I had to move right after that and graduate and move. And I was moving up to Cleveland to start my residency and all this kind of stuff. But that stayed with me. And it even though I got busy, that never left. And so as I got into more and more into the practice of medicine, I started to see that what we do in medicine, in Western medicine, that is we focus almost, it's not 100%, because we do give behavioral medicine a little bit of credence, but not much. But we focus almost 100% on the physical, right? And we do that for a whole bunch of reasons. One is it's because we can measure it, right? And we think of ourselves as scientists, physicians do. There is a science to it. However, I think there's more art to it than there is science, but there's no art taught in allopathic medical school. And you can measure blood pressure, you can measure cholesterol, you can measure sugar and all this kind of stuff. So it becomes a much easier way to practice. So, look, your blood pressure is too high, your cholesterol is too high, your sugar is too high. I'm going to give you these medicines and I'll see you back in 3 months.
Right. It's all based on statistics or numbers or what
you can manipulate those numbers, right? But on the other hand, you go and you talk about, and I don't even like to use the word stress. I like to use the term emotion more than stress, because we do talk about stress in medicine, but we really don't know what it is. And again, it can be measured, but it's a very difficult thing to measure. We don't do the very good job with that. So I think that it has led us to this belief that all we do is we are physical beings. So your back hurts, go and see if there's something wrong with your back. And if you look at all of the things that people go to doctors for, that is allopathic physicians, I'll be generous and I'll say 80% of the time, but it's probably more like 90% of the time, we don't find anything physical.
Right.
Okay. So if you go to see, I don't care what specialist it is, whether it's primary care, neurologist, orthopedic surgeon, cardiologist, GI, it doesn't matter. We all have our names for these they're usually very fancy terms for basically people who have pain, headache, and they don't have a brain tumor, belly pain, and they don't have Crohn's disease, they don't have colon cancer, they don't have appendicitis, back pain, and they don't have a ruptured disc or herniated disc. And we have fancy names for all this stuff, right? So if you have belly pain and we don't find anything, it's irritable bowel syndrome, right?
Right.
And then once you give it a name, then you can develop a pharmaceutical to try to treat this thing that we have no idea what we're really treating because we didn't find anything physical.
Right.
That's a long-winded kind of answer to you.
Well, and this all creates the base for what we're going to discuss, or we are discussing. So you end up coming out of college, you go to do your residency, and then there's a certain timeline where you end up starting your own practice, which was very different than what was currently in style at the time.
Yeah. So I when I came out of my fellowship training for cardiology, I went to Greensboro, North Carolina, and joined, a cardiology group. It was LeBauer Cardiology in Greensboro. Great bunch of guys doing great stuff. very cutting edge, doing research type things, and just a good a good group. Treated me well, and I enjoyed my time there. But again, when I looked at everything that was going on, again, it was very physically based. So if someone was having chest pain, right, then it was, you have to look for blockage. And that's fine. You do have to look for blockage. You want to make sure that they're not having unstable angina or a heart attack or what have you. But again, I would say 80% of the time, and it's probably more than that, when you see people with chest pain, they're not having a heart attack. They don't have unstable angina. And so we check all that out, and then we say, oh, your heart is fine to some degree. And then, we say follow up with your primary care, or you continue to see them back, and they come back, they continue to have symptoms because people just continue to have symptoms. And then we start with medicines, and because we don't know what else to do.
Right.
And so when I left the group, I started a practice I call the Integrative Cardiology Center. And at the Integrative Cardiology Center, I was the only MD there. And I still did the traditional cardiology stuff. So if you came in and you had chest pain, the first thing you would get is a standard sort of traditional allopathic workup. You'd get a history, a physical exam, although the history was in more depth, EKGs, echocardiograms, stress tests, whatever it needed to feel comfortable, that there wasn't something physically going on, because you do have to rule that out first. And then if there wasn't, then we started with a different approach, which was a challenge because I wasn't trained in a different approach. And so the different approach evolved over time. It first started off as something I called the Personal Awareness Program. I had to change the name of that because the acronym was PAP. So
not great.
But, and it's good that it changed names, because it was a program that no one could do. It was like so intense, and there was so much going on, and including myself. But one of the things, for instance, that was part of the Personal Awareness Program was a gratitude journal. And the gratitude journal is one of those things that stuck, and it became really a foundational part of my practice personally, and also in the my professional practice. But other parts of it sort of stuck as well. And then in that practice, we also had traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, naturopathic medicine, Chinese massage therapy, yoga, tai chi, counseling. So it was really quite fun. Yeah, that was for about 10 years.
Well, it also seems pretty progressive, because even though you and I are pretty steeped in this industry or this mindset of bringing together all these different areas of healing, it isn't something that's actually still mainstream at this point.
No. So for this area, it was a bit unusual. I'm not sure, just from a financial standpoint, that it was the perfect area to do that. If you had to set up a practice,
right?
I set it up in the middle of the triad, which is Greensboro, High Point, and Winston-Salem. And I tried to bring in patients from all three cities, which actually worked pretty well. But traditionally, the patients don't go get their health care, in the other cities. They stick to the one city.
Okay.
And so the practice did fine. The practice was, very good. Then patients started to come from outside the area, since I was the only one kind of doing that kind of practice in a big area. People came from sort of all over. So that became kind of interesting as well, to see how things all spread by word of mouth, because there really wasn't, I didn't have a website. I didn't have no advertising or anything like that. So it was fun to watch, but there were definitely people out there looking for that sort of practice. And it was a very different patient population. Okay. You got to also understand, one of the things that's difficult in medicine is the different patient population. So this patient population was a much more educated patient population, not necessarily formally educated, but educated on their own. It was almost more of a consultative practice with the patient. So they came in already had read, they had already had ideas, they already had, and they had questions. It wasn't so much, doc, I'm not feeling good, figure out what's going on and fix it. It was more, hey, I've been to a doctor, I've been diagnosed with X, Y, and Z. They want to put me on these 19 medicines. I don't want to take any. What should we do? And then, we'd end up with, okay, well, maybe, and I'd be a little facetious with 19, but it might be 5, 6, or 7 medicines, and they didn't want to take any. And I might say, well, this is why these are important, because I still was sort of trained in pharmaceuticals, so I understood pharmaceuticals. And I have no problem with pharmaceuticals. The problem that I have, though, is that you start with the pharmaceutical and you never get off of it, because pharmaceuticals outside of antibiotics don't cure anything, right? So, and that's why it's the perfect, from a financial standpoint, it's the perfect means of creating, a business, right? Because you have something that people have to take every day, buy every month, forever, right? Because high blood pressure pills don't cure high blood pressure. Sugar pills, diabetes pills don't cure diabetes, right? So it becomes an issue. My problem is, if you're going to treat high blood pressure, for instance, the medicines are critically important. The medicines work. We've got good studies. Having high blood pressure, again, you can study this, right? You got the number. When people's blood pressures are high, that's bad. We know that.
Right.
That makes sense. If you lower the pressure with medicines, that's good. That people seem to do better. I have no problem with that either. The problem is, why is your blood pressure up to begin with?
Yes.
And we don't really know the answer to that. We don't really study the answer to that, right? Because no one sort of cares about the answer to that. The pharmaceutical companies don't care.
Right.
Right. The pharmaceutical companies, they just say, well, it's high and that's bad, so just take this medicine. Who cares why it's up?
Right.
Right.
So
you have to look into that.
With that initial woman that you had seen at the end of your schooling, and this idea that you're talking about now, and how you set up your practice, is that you are going and taking more time to actually get to know your patients. And
yes.
You have told me several stories of that. Yeah. Even to this day, you're actually still friendly with many of your patients because you forged a relationship or you got to know them.
Yeah. So it's always kind of funny because some of my former partners or friends would come and see me as patients or whatever, and they'd comment, Julius doesn't really do much. It was I always thought was interesting, and so people ask me, well, what do you do? And I used to kind of chuckle because I didn't really have an answer. I'm like, I don't really know what I do, because this is not what I was taught necessarily, but it is what I was taught. And so it took a little while for me to think about that and start to understand, that what I probably do is what your country doctor did, 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So if you go back, before we had all this fancy stuff, and you go back to the times of country doctors, they were still effective. Even though, if you look, they didn't have this grand expanse of medications and pharmaceuticals that we have. They had limited things that they could do. They had limited surgeries that they could do. Yet they were effective. And one of the reasons they were effective, there's a lot of things they couldn't do. Don't get me wrong, and things were much more challenging for them. But there was a lot of things, because remember, 80%, 90% of the time, there's nothing physical really going on. Mm-hmm. But they lived in the community. They knew the community. They may have birthed half the community.
Right.
They knew you. They knew your family, right? They knew that you were married to your husband, and your husband was alcoholic, and his whole family, came from alcoholics, and that when they drank, they were, abusive or whatever. And you had that to deal with, let's just say, at home. Mm-hmm. They understood all that, so that when you came in with headaches or with belly pain, he wasn't worried about appendicitis so much, right? Mm-hmm. And so he might put you on something to help, ease that, but he also might, talk to you about what's going on, or listen, which, again, it's hard for physicians today to listen, because listening takes time. Mm-hmm. And, as reimbursements have gone down over time, physicians have responded. This is one of the criticisms I have, is that, we've allowed the industry the way it is to dictate the way we practice.
Right.
And so as reimbursements have gone down, we've countered by being more efficient and seeing more patients. Well, if you see more patients, then you have to see them faster, so you can't spend as much time. So today, as you know, and as most people know, when you go to see a primary care doc, he may be there for 10 minutes, maybe a lot.
Right.
Right. It may not even be that if you really look at it. And then today we have the electronic medical record. So the 10 minutes that they're there, they're typing on the computer, because if they don't, they have to take that computer home with them, or they have to stay late at the office and they have to do their charts at night. So there's a lot of stress on the physicians as well. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of depression amongst physicians. So we're sort of at a crux right now. I think, the cost of medicine is out of control. Doctors are, depressed. Patients aren't happy. The insurance company aren't happy because things are getting so expensive. So it's been a challenge, I think, for everyone. So we do really have a healthcare crisis right now. There's no easy answer, so we'll see what happens.
I would like for you to talk a little bit more about the gratitude, and also, because I mentioned earlier when I did the introduction that you have been influential in the fitness industry, which seems like an offshoot to what your background was. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that came to be and how it's all tied together.
Yeah, so it is all tied together. Things work out the way they're supposed to work out. In the end, when the gratitude thing came out, the thing that I noticed is patients, when that personal awareness program was kind of so big and hairy that it was impossible to do. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that stuck was this gratitude journaling. People seemed to like it, or they got something out of it, and they would continue doing it. And some of the results were just not really believable. I mean, you couldn't even make the stories up, how important they were. And there are studies. The reason I started with the gratitude journals are actually studies that show that gratitude is beneficial in many ways. In matter of fact, so I do have a YouTube channel that's not really all that there's not much on it. However, I did make a commercial at one point and I called it Gratuita, which is sort of a parody on Latuda, which is the antidepressant drug. And in that commercial, so I try to do the commercial sort of exactly the way the Latuda commercial is done. And in those commercials, they list all of those side effects, that mm-hmm. potential side effects real fast or whatever. Well, I list a bunch of side effects from gratitude that are on there these are all scientifically sort of backed things. And if you listen closely to all those effects of gratitude, and you didn't know it was gratitude, if someone just said that, hey, this really is a drug called Gratuita, you would say, oh my God, everyone should be on that drug. What drug is that? Right? And it's just gratitude. So if people, I think it's still available. I'll have to see, but if it's not, I'll put it back up there. But yeah, so we can talk about that at the end. But it's gratefully-well.com. The website doesn't work, I found out, but the YouTube channel does.
That's all that's important.
So it is there. The health, the fitness industry thing worked out interestingly. So locally, we had I have a lot of good friends, and one of the group of the friends are naturopathic physicians, the Titas, and it was Jade and Keone and Jillian Tita, and they're big in the fitness industry. Mm-hmm. And Jill Coleman, who used to be married to Jade, was big into this as well. And as I started working with Jill, then I started working with her clientele. She basically gave me the opportunity to do that. So that's how that kind of got started.
So when you started working with those clients, though, you kind of took the gratitude idea, but it kind of became something much bigger than that.
Yeah. So I realized that as all this was going on, that there was more to it than just gratitude. And both from a professional and a personal experience, because this really, there was no book for me to go out and sort of read about, and there was no mentor out there to show me this is how to do this type of practice. So it was really, again, something that just evolved out of a strong interest and belief that I had that, okay, fine, I can understand that there is this emotional basis to illness, let's call it. And physicians have a very difficult time wrapping their arms around that because, again, it's not something we're taught. But yet, if you break it down a little bit, it's not that hard to start to see that how these emotions, again, I don't like to think of it as stress, how these emotions control the body.
Right.
Okay. So the first thing that's important to understand is that emotions tend to come from a thought. So every emotion is preceded by a thought. Okay. I'm not sure you can have an emotion without having a thought first. Now, the thought may be unconscious, it may be an unconscious belief, but there has to be a thought there. So give you an example. Okay. If you're good enough with your imagination, right, and you picture a lemon, and if you close your eyes and I took you through a little, kind of guided meditation on a lemon, and you pictured the lemon and you felt the lemon and you cut the lemon in a slice and then you bit into the lemon, if you did that, you would start to salivate. There's no lemon there. Right? A better example would be, this happened to me. And this is actually one of the things that helped me start to understand this. So I'm laying in bed one night, and this is 25 years ago, and I heard it. I was just falling asleep. I heard a noise downstairs, and so it was a strange noise. It wasn't a noise that I was used to hearing in the house. So I had a thought was, I wonder if someone broke in. So then thoughts will run away with themselves, right? So as the thoughts are running, right, it went from someone breaking in to two people breaking in. And my kids were little at the time, and it would be that these two people broke in, and now they were going to come upstairs and they were going to, hold us at gunpoint or knife point and tie us up and do all those horrible things, right? Well, as I was having those thoughts, my heart is racing. It's pounding out of my chest, right? My hands are clammy. Yeah. My pupils are dilated, right? If you would have measured my blood pressure, it would probably be sky high, right? If you measured my things like, believe it or not, sugar goes up, cholesterol goes up with stress. And so those were probably up, right? So bad things are sort of happening in my body, so to speak. Yet there's no one there.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's as if they're there, right? Because if they were there, it's the same reaction. Maybe it'd be a little bit stronger, but this was pretty darn strong. Okay. So then I got the nerve up to go see what's going on, what happened with this. Sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know if I can. There's a way to mute this. So sorry. So it's very distracting. So then I go downstairs and I see this broom fell over in the kitchen, and that was the sound. I recognized the sound of broom fall, and I went, oh, that's what that sound was. I said, okay. So I went back upstairs, and now it took about 2 hours for.
Gotta love the telemarketers.
Yeah, that probably was. So I sat there, and this probably wasn't until a couple weeks later that I started to become aware of how powerful thoughts can be, right? So I was scared, right? The fear was preceded by a thought, right? A thought that someone broke in. Now, so once you have that thought, right, then what happens is you have these, as Candace Pert called them, molecules of emotion, right? Hormones, neurotransmitters that get released. And when these things are released, then they adhere to a receptor and they cause a physiologic change in the body. So in this case, it would be epinephrine, right? Adrenaline
Mm-hmm.
that was released. Adrenaline goes to a receptor, and then when it attaches to that receptor, blood vessels constrict, so blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, right? Sugar goes up,
Mm-hmm.
cholesterol goes up. All of these things happen, right? So all that started with a thought,
Right.
right? So if you, it's not that hard. Okay, when you look at, okay, well, this just happened,
Mm-hmm.
so blood pressure's up. Okay, well, if that happens on a chronic basis, like you're scared all the time, like many of us are, and we call that chronic anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it's not too hard to see how you'd have elevated levels of some neurotransmitter or
Mm-hmm.
some hormone that would be causing your blood pressure to chronically be elevated,
Right.
and we would call that hypertension,
Right.
right? And so again, that's not talked about in medicine at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet we know, for instance, that um, steroids, okay, prednisone as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cortisone, corticosteroids are stress hormones, right? They go up when you're under stress. Every doctor knows that. That's like taught in medical school. We're also taught that corticosteroids, if you take them, they will raise your cholesterol. That's one of the side effects of taking prednisone,
Right.
right? So again, there's sort of two different thoughts that if you put them together, if your endogenous prednisone, that is cortisol, is chronically elevated, that's one thing that might be able to, of course, there's genetics, there's a lot of other things involved, but that could raise cholesterol on a chronic basis. So these are the things, just take your medicine and don't worry about your thoughts, right? Because it's easy to wake up in the morning and take your 2 or 3 or 5 or 12 pills,
Right.
right? But to get your thoughts under control is a whole different story.
Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into that because we all have millions of thoughts per day or thousands, and I know there's like 50,000 is I think the average that they say we have a day. And they come in, they come out, they come in, they come out, and we get on these loops of a certain way of thinking over and over and over again. How, if we are having a thought and most of them are negative, I'm gonna in general say they're either negative. Probably a grand statement, but I think it's probably accurate for most people.
Okay.
It's rather fear based, like, oh goodness, I'm going to be late for. I'm leaving 15 minutes late. I'm going to be late for this event, and then triggers like a whole bunch of other thoughts that continue to be negative. I'm not sure I wear the right jacket. Is it going to rain? And we're in these, and that's all benign. That's not even talking about
Yeah,
the
my
really
line.
big things that may happen in life, like that
Yeah.
client that you had who house burned down, her husband
Yeah.
left her dog died. Those are the bigger, meatier things that happen in life consistently. If you are having these thoughts, these negative thoughts, or any of these thoughts, how do you deal with them?
Yeah. So again, these are that was the question, right? Because I'm not a counselor, even though some people go to physicians for counseling. We're not typically trained that way. That takes time as well. And so I'll step back a second. And so I had to find a way to sort of put this whole thing together. And again, a lot of this was from sort of personal experience as well. But and we could talk about this for tens and tens of hours or whatever
I know.
to get to. But ultimately, I came up with the notion that everyone talks about feeling not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I came up with the notion that if that's universal, which it seems to be, at some point, most of us feel not good enough. Could you use that as an explanation for all human behavior and everything that happens to us? So it sounded kind of outlandish. It really didn't sound like it made a whole lot of sense. But again, over time, and as I put two and two together, it started to slowly make more and more sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so today, I can explain human behavior based on feelings of, let's call it self-hatred or not good enoughness.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 you can use that then to get people to understand that at the end of the day, what they're doing to themselves. Because the thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because although they may run away, you're not necessarily responsible for your thoughts, but you can be responsible for your reaction to the thoughts and or your response to the thoughts, right?
Right.
So there's a thought and there's a reaction,
Mm-hmm.
and the miracle happens in between, right? That space in between the thought and the reaction, that's where the miracle really happens, because that in that gap, in that space of time, is where you have a choice, and it's your choice to decide what it is that how are you going to respond to that. Now, a lot of people think and a lot of times it's natural. It's like, it's not a conscious choice. It's unconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if someone's coming at me with a knife and I respond by fear, it's not conscious, right? It just sort of happens.
Right.
Okay. That would seem to be true, but in some of those kind of extreme examples. But for the most part, you do have, if you think about it long enough, you will start to find that you do have a choice in how you will respond. Then not only that, so that's important, but
right.
then I think even more important is not necessarily the response you choose,
Mm-hmm.
but then how you choose to judge yourself in the response that you chose.
Mm-hmm.
That, in the end, is huge.
I kind of want to go into a couple of examples of this, but I want to bring up that you and I have talked for many years, and I've seen your work through other people who, when I say that you have taught many other people, and they have then kind of given their own version of this in the world. Now, I want to go in a little bit deeper about the response, because we are a society that heavily believes in the victim mindset.
Yeah.
Even traditional medicine, as you would say, that you are the victim to this disease that has happened to you.
Or thing. You've got cancer. You had a heart attack. You had whatever. Yes.
Yeah. It's not that. And what you're talking about is taking full responsibility for that, even when these ostensibly negative, very negative or bad things happen to ourselves.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how that actually can cause you freedom versus it being viewed as a negative thing? Because it sounds really bad.
It sounds really bad.
As in to say, because I've seen people struggle when you explain this. I've seen people struggle with that concept, because it seems very hard to say, well, you're telling me that this thing is happening to me, but I'm causing it to happen.
Yeah. That's the challenge with the program is it's much easier to choose to be a victim than to be a non-victim, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, it's easier to say, but it's not my fault.
Right.
This happened to me. This was done to me. And look, I call myself the super victim, because I could create a victim scenario out of a scenario that really, I could win the lottery and I could create a victim scenario. Oh my God, look at all the taxes I have to pay, and all these people are calling that I don't even know, and they say they're my family and they want money and it's just, oh my God, it's horrible. So anyway, I could create a victim scenario very easily over anything. And if something's bad happening, I could take it, and even if it's small, I could make it bigger, and I could drag it out. I mean, I was really, really good at it. So I get it. Okay. It is a much better way to do it. And again, I don't believe anymore in right and wrong or better. Mm-hmm. There's no right way to deal with this. You want to deal with it as a victim, you go right ahead and deal with it as a victim. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not going to judge you, because that's what most of us do anyway. That's fine. But realize that when you're on that when you choose that victim path, as I call it,
Mm-hmm.
that victim path is lined with all sorts of negative emotions, anger, fear, guilt, grief, what have you. And that path always ends in misery, right?
Right.
And so that's if you're going to be a victim, you're going to be miserable. That's just the way it is. If you stop and think about that, it actually makes sense.
Right.
Okay. So to make a choice to get off of that victim path onto what I call the non-victim path. I don't know what the word for opposite of victim is. I still haven't figured it out. It's not victor, but let's call it the non-victim path. That getting off of that, it's an easy leap. Okay, it's a very easy, and that path isn't any better
Mm-hmm.
than the victim path. Okay, it's just a different path, and that path ends in peace as opposed to misery. I'm also saying that peace isn't better than misery.
Right.
It's just more peaceful.
And also, I might add into that is when you are on the non-victim path, you are empowered because you're able to make choices. Victims usually don't have the opportunity to make choices.
Well, the choice you made is to be the victim.
Well, yeah, that's a good point.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. And so, so it takes a lot of courage to choose to step off of the victim path onto the non-victim path. That's the only way I can put it, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so much easier in our society. Again, we have these, people play up the victim role, and you see, and it's advertised. If you go to watch TV, right, put on the news,
Oh,
all you
God,
see
yeah.
is a bunch of victims. You don't see people who are the
Yeah.
non-victims, right? It's
Right.
very rare that they, show that kind of stuff. And then we support people's victimhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, poor thing! Look at what happened to him or her. Oh, how horrible, and this kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And so it's very easy to find support for your victimhood,
Mm-hmm.
and we call that support. Okay, I would venture to say that that's not very supportive in the long run. Basically, what that is supporting is your misery,
Right.
right? And so to choose to look at a situation as not being a victim, again, takes a lot of courage. And you see this for instance, in battered women. I use that example over and over because maybe because I understand it to some degree. But battered women, if you look at the studies and when you work with them, people who work with them understand this. They will, they get into different relationships. And they're always battered it may be a different form of battering, but it's always some abusive in some way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at the end, after 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these, the person, because not always a woman, but the person will say, why do I keep picking these guys that do this or
Right.
these women that do this, right? They start to realize that, hey, they are the common denominator,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, if you look at it from the not good enough standpoint, then you can use that. And again, even if someone says that's a bunch of BS, maybe, but it still works, whether it's BS or not. And that is, you take this thought, I hate myself, right? I have this high level of self-hatred. I am no good. It's the same thing. It's a different way of saying the same thing. And then you say, I'm so no good that I don't deserve to be treated well.
Mm-hmm.
I deserve to be treated poorly, whatever that is. And then hence you are likely to get into these relationships. I say, well, how do you do that? How do you know that this guy is going to do that? Well, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
again, if you look and you think about it carefully, you will start to see energetically, right? You can find guys that are, more have more aggressive kind of personalities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now you think you're attracted to them because they're good looking, and because they're well built or they're ripped or whatever. And so you think you're attracted for that reason. I would actually venture to say that you're actually attracted energetically because you don't know what he's going to do, but he's more likely to do that.
Right.
And you could take it even a step further and say, well, even if he doesn't, he can be provoked into doing that. So that's starting to get a little controversial, but that's sort of one example. I think that's, again, it may be hard for people to see. but it's hard. It's really hard to decide I will take, sort of control of this. It's happened. It doesn't negate the fact that you're being battered, right? It doesn't negate the fact that if it's a dangerous situation, you should leave. I never would say you should stay in any kind of situation like that.
Right.
Right. However, once you leave and you get out of the situation and you find a job now and you're whatever, you're doing your stuff, if you don't deal with this stuff, guess what? The next relationship you find, it's likely to be abusive as well.
How do you suggest that people cultivate an awareness around their actions? Because a lot of what we're talking about is subconscious.
It's all unconscious. Yeah.
Or we accept it, we think that it is subconscious. So how do you tap into being more aware of your actions?
So that's the key, right? So if everyone hates themselves, if everyone thinks they're no good or not good enough, let's put it, this sort of started out with self-hatred, then it went to no good, then it went to not good enough. I kind of had to keep lessening it or making it a little easier for people to accept, because if you say just self-hatred, people have a lot of difficulty sort of getting to that for some reason. But if you say, oh, you feel not good enough, people understand that, right? So if you're able to get to the point where you think you're no good or not good enough, that gives you a place to start to explain what is happening to you. Again, whether it's true or not, you could argue, but it's effective in using that. If you can accept that, okay, then you can use that and say, oh, okay, so I feel, again, you take the battered woman just because we're using that example, I feel so no good that I deserve to be treated poorly, so I'm going to go out and find this guy that's likely to do this. So now you can start to become aware, because you can't change anything if you're not aware of it, right?
Correct.
So the first thing you have to do is you have to become aware of your unconscious thoughts. Well, how do you become aware if it's unconscious, right?
Yeah.
So this to me is a way to take those unconscious beliefs, or I like to call them unconscious knowings, because it's actually stronger than a belief, right? This is a knowing that you're not good enough,
right?
Unconscious, and this is a way of bringing that into the consciousness by becoming aware and saying, hey, this is a possibility. If this is all coming from me feeling not good enough, then you can, when you look at that, you can become aware of it. Then you can sort of, you can start to change it if you want. That's one thing to do. That's challenging. Change is always really hard. However, even if you don't change it, if you just become aware of what it is you're doing, and then the other challenge is not to judge what you're doing. And if you can do all that, you will find miracles happen. There's miracles in the awareness, in the self-acceptance. And so I have a whole course on that. I did a webinar on self-acceptance. I called it self-compassion at the time only because it was a little trendier. I like the term self-acceptance better than self-compassion, only because compassion has could have a little different connotation for some people. Self-acceptance, I think, I just like the term better, the notion of, finding a way to accept yourself as you are. In fact, I don't know if you can see that behind me, in fact,
Julius is pointing to a painting if people are just listening to this, or a piece of artwork.
So this was a friend of mine, Melissa Wilkie, who commissioned an artist, Joyce Tita, who happens to be the mother of J.B. Cooney. And she did this. So she's a calligrapher, and an artist. And
it says finding acceptance as you are. It's a beautiful piece of artwork.
Isn't that great?
It is. It's really great.
I actually took a picture, and that's my background on my desktop on my computer.
Oh, that's so interesting. I had heard that she was a great artist. It's nice to see one of her pieces.
She's a wonderful person as well. But and so so finding acceptance as you are, and if you can get to that, again, there's that's where miracles happen. I can't tell you how important it is.
Well, and when you talk about the acceptance, I think it's important to note that you're referring also to the good, the bad, the indifferent, all these parts of us, our shadow, our non-shadow, our highlight reel on social media, our ability to get angry and yell at people and be just a downright jerk at the grocery store, like to really accept all of it.
Yeah.
Which is different than loving yourself.
Yes.
And I think that's where you're talking about a little bit with the compassion.
I try to get through these terms that don't have a lot of, that aren't very tangible, that don't have a lot of meaning. So like loving yourself, what does that mean?
Right.
And you can talk about loving yourself and you go, oh, I'm going to go out and get a massage, or I'm going to get a mani-pedi, or I'm going to take a bubble bath and, have a glass of champagne. That's all nice things, right? But you go out and buy yourself something nice to be nice to yourself. But, you get home, oh, I did something nice for myself. But then your credit card bill comes and you forgot that you didn't have enough money to really buy that dress. And now you put it on your credit card, which was already, higher than it should be. And now you're even feeling worse about yourself. So it's not about being nice to yourself, right? It's being accept. And so that loving thing is, again, I just don't like it as a term. There's nothing wrong with it, of course. But I like the self-acceptance a lot better, because it's finding a way not to judge. So we've got these voices in our head, right? Victim voice, judge voice. And it's finding a way not to judge whatever it is that you choose, however you choose to react, right? Because one of the things when I first got into this, and I thought I had it all figured out, right? And I was like, oh, now I know how I'm gonna react all the time, so I'm always gonna be at peace, and so I wasn't, right? And I didn't react that way all the time, and that was actually maybe the toughest time of my life. It was much worse than what I had been previously. And the reason was because previously I was doing it, but I didn't know I was doing it.
Right.
Now I was doing the same thing, but now I knew what I was doing. So now I must be even a bigger moron, right? So now I beat myself up even more. Oh, you're a big idiot now, because you were an idiot before, but you're a bigger idiot now because now you know what you're doing and you're doing it anyway. You're still doing it. And so that made things much worse. So again, it took a long time to where I could get to this place of finding that acceptance and realizing that I did have a choice on how I would respond, right? And that I would hope maybe I would respond a certain way, but regardless of how I responded, that actually wasn't important. What was important was my judgment of the response. And when I could accept the fact that I didn't respond maybe the way I wanted, but that's okay. One response isn't better than another. Okay, one might lead to misery and the other might lead to peace. But again, misery isn't better than peace. It's just peace is more peaceful. Misery is more miserable. Okay, but other than that, they're still important, both of them.
Right. And I guess also with that, when you are aware of what you're doing, you know yourself better in a way, because you're more aware of what you're actually doing and what you're capable of, whether in either scenario.
I can use this to explain every single thing that I do. Every single thing, and even little things, So I had an incident. I remember I use this as an example because it's easy to understand and it's simple. So I was working from home, and it was a beautiful day that day, and I had laid out some stuff to grill, and I said I've got to be really efficient this morning so that I got an hour for lunch. If I can be really efficient and be done right at noon, I can go out, I can grill, and then I can eat and I can get cleaned up in my hour, but I got to be really efficient. Well, anyone that knows me knows I'm anything but efficient. There's like not one efficient cell in my body. And so I set myself up, so to speak, and I wasn't efficient, not surprised. And so when it came noontime, I was still doing whatever I was finishing, whatever I had to finish. And it was probably 12:15 or 12:20 by the time I was done. right?
Mm-hmm.
So I went upstairs, and now I say I had 40 minutes, which was not going to be enough time to get all this stuff done. And my wife was upstairs, and so she knew what was going on. So she was trying to help. So she took the stuff outside to grill, and bless her heart, she's not that good at grilling. So I spouted something off about you know, not being helpful or something to that effect. And she goes outside in a huff, trying to figure out how to open the grill or turn it on or whatever. And I'm upset, right? And I yelled at her. So now I'm getting increasingly upset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in all of that, this is all happening within a minute, okay, or less. So as soon as I have a negative emotion,
Mm-hmm.
that's always the trigger to tell you that you're playing victim. 100% of the time, if you have a negative emotion, you're playing a victim role. The degree of negativity of the emotion isn't important.
Right.
Okay. It could be rage, it could be anger, it could be, that you're annoyed, or you could be a little peeved. It doesn't matter. If you're having a negative emotion, which basically means you're not feeling good,
mm-hmm.
right? And you don't even have to isolate the emotion. You don't have to name it. You're just like, oh, I'm not feeling good. You're playing victim.
I actually would love to challenge anybody who's watching this to try it, because it's actually a fun game.
It can be fun.
It's because it's insane. You could do it like one evening when you're sitting on the couch and you start to have and just try it.
Incredibly fun. You're exactly right. And so what happened there was I was having a negative emotion. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was playing victim.
Mm-hmm.
I was, because I didn't, finish it because I had quote unquote too much work to do that I couldn't be done at noon.
Right.
Which had nothing to do with the amount of work to do.
Yeah.
It had to do with the fact that I wasn't efficient, which I was really saying is I'm no good. I can't even be efficient for half a day to be able to go out and do this.
Right.
Right. I'm so no good. So what I was really angry is not my wife, who was just trying to help.
Right.
I was mad at myself for being not good enough. Otherwise, for hating myself.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I realized that, and she came back in, I said, wait a minute. I'm sorry. She said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm not mad at you. I said, I'm mad at me. I know what I'm doing here is I'm mad because I wasn't efficient this morning, efficient enough to get this done.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm upset, and I'm sorry. So again, within that literally minute or two span of time, that situation, which years ago would have probably, accelerated up to full blown, who knows what, don't talk to each other for I don't know how many days.
Yeah.
It became then. I didn't laugh at that instant,
mm-hmm.
but it became something that was now I was at peace. I understood it, and it completely changed everything, because then we went out. I started the grill up. She grilled the stuff. We grilled, we ate, and then she cleaned up the stuff and happened to still be at home, and it all still worked out fine.
Right. And that's a great example, because it also illustrates not only what we're working on, but the dance that we do with other people, where we can draw them in, and then we can also trigger them. So it's this chain effect out of.
So that's a great point, actually, because again, it wasn't going to go there, but so she was who also feels not good enough,
mm-hmm.
was like, I can't even, grill a steak or whatever. I'm so no good that I can't even go out and help, even though I want to help necessarily. And
right.
so again, so that's what I call the spiritual dance. Okay. And I actually think at all relationships, it doesn't matter, not just romantic relationships, all relationships, whether it's siblings or parent and child or what have you,
coworkers,
you with the customer service person at Verizon, and whatever. It doesn't matter, your waitress at the restaurant, whatever. All the relationships are really about what I call button pushing. They're really all about not good enoughness. Okay, so
mm-hmm.
if you're having real quick, if you're having a bad day, and you decided you're not going to cook, you're just going to go eat, but maybe it's going to be expensive and you don't really want to spend the money, but so you guys go out to eat, right? But you're in a bad mood, and plus you're having to eat out and you didn't really want to do that, and so Now you happen to get, a waiter or a waitress who's also having a bad day, right? So now you can push each other's buttons,
Perfectly.
right? And so you may choose, and she's gonna, she's had, who knows, maybe she had a fight with her husband before she left for work, and her son is sick, and she didn't have any PTO time, and she had to leave him with a neighbor, and who knows what, right?
Right.
And so she's feeling like not a good enough mother.
Yeah.
Let's just say, right? And so now you're not good enough, and she's not good enough, and you do this button pushing thing, and it turns out to be, this miserable sort of dinner. If you choose, and only one person has to be aware, you go into that situation. I'm feeling really bad, and I'm like, I know what's going on here. I feel no good because of these reasons. And you may start, the interaction with the waitress may set it off. And you go, whoa, wait a minute. I know what I'm doing. And then you can choose, how are you going to react? You still may continue to react in this negative sort of way,
right.
Or you may choose to completely change it. Either way, in that awareness, there is miracles that happen in the awareness, and I can't begin to explain how powerful it is.
Julius, as we wrap this up a little bit, I want to know.
Well, we're going to only talk for 15 minutes, right?
I know. As usual.
We should have said that at the
later.
beginning. We're going to talk 15 minutes, so it'll only be an hour and a half.
Yeah, 6 miles walked after. Where can people reach you?
It's a good question. So I don't do much in the way of social media. I have a day job, and so I do this as a passion. I don't like to think of it doing it on the side because it's what I do. I do it all the time.
Like I said, the best known unknown.
I get criticized because I don't charge for doing it, for working with people.
Yeah.
There's a part of a belief that I have, where life is an offering. And I wrote a whole poem about it, and in fact, it's in the in this webinar I'm going to tell you about in a second. I do have a webinar that I did several years ago that I think I called Self-Compassion or Self-Acceptance. I can't remember exactly how it's titled. And it's a 5-part webinar. I think each webinar is somewhere in the order of about an hour. And I can put that on the YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel is Gratefully Well, spelled GreatFully. That was not Annick's idea, by the way.
I don't like the name, which is why he's making fun of me.
And I can make that available for anyone who wants to watch it.
Okay,
in addition, there's the Gratuita commercial on there, which is just fun. And additionally, there's a cancer gratitude exercise that I did. So when my wife had breast cancer back in 2005, and I said, the gratitude journal is very powerful. I said, but how do you do gratitude? If you're getting chemotherapy every week and you're getting weaker and you're getting sicker, how do you maintain that level of gratefulness or gratitude? And I think it could be a challenge. So came up with the idea of doing a recording that basically it's 3 parts. There's an intro that you just have to listen to once. Then there's a little meditative exercise to kind of get you relaxed. And then there's a gratitude exercise that basically takes you through all the steps, being grateful for your doctor and nurses and act to the end where you're grateful actually for the chemotherapy, for the actual medicine, and allowing it into your body in this sort of positive way to allow it to go and do things that it needs to do and not do the harmful things that it might do. So people have found it very helpful. So it's on there as well. I think it's called Cancer Gratitude Exercise. I'm looking for it now. Cancer Chemotherapy Gratitude Exercise.
Okay. And we'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in looking at those links in those videos, it'll all be in the show notes. Definitely.
Very good. So we talked about 1% of all the stuff that I thought we would talk about.
I know. Well, it's almost an hour.
I know.
I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you to live fiercely?
Oh, I forgot to prepare for this question.
It's not a test.
So I remember
You're so not good. You can't answer the question.
I'm not so no good that I can't. Yeah. So I remember when you first told me about the name, and I loved it because so many people today talk about living fearlessly,
Yeah.
and I think again that's sort of this misnomer that we have, because being fearless is not really all that easy or possible, I don't think. But living fiercely or loving fiercely, I think for me, again, goes back to the notion that you actually hinted on, and that is embracing all of life, and loving and living fiercely and loving fiercely, embracing what you would call the good and the bad. And at the end of the day, um, those are terms that we use that we really need to get rid of. We need to get rid of success, failure, good, bad, better, right? Because that would make it seem like, oh, if I do this and I improve, then it's saying that where you are today isn't as good or is no good compared to where you are when you quote unquote improve. And I don't believe that. I believe that where you are today, you're perfectly fine and just the way you are. And if you change, then you're fine that way too. And you're different, but not better.
Right.
You may be more at peace, but again, that's peace isn't necessarily better. So bringing all that in and being able to embrace all of that, all of life, it becomes critically important. So failure to me isn't failure; it's an outcome. Success is an outcome. So I think we should talk about outcomes and not failures. Like people are saying, "Oh, you should learn from your failures." Well, maybe it wasn't really a failure, right? So if you're a scientist, right, and you do an experiment and you expect a certain outcome and you don't get it, you say, oh, that experiment failed. And so then you go, but it gave you an idea, and you go, I wonder if I did something like this, and you do something else and you still don't get the outcome, and so you got a second failed experiment. And then you go, when I did that, this happened, and then when I changed and did this happened. I wonder, maybe what I need to do is this third thing. And then you do the third thing and you get the outcome that you wanted. And maybe it's even better than you expected. Now, you never would have had that idea without the first two, quote unquote, failed experiments.
Right.
So were they failures or were they successes? I would say they were actually successes, because they helped you then on the third one figure out, what, and not only did you figure it out, you got a better result that you never would have come up with had you not had those first two. So who knows what a failure really is? So think in terms of outcomes, but importantly, again, embracing all of life. I think the important thing for me, we always talk about happiness, right? Everyone wants to be happy. To me, it's not about happiness. Happiness is great, but it's a momentary sort of time event in your life. Something happens, you graduate, you got an A, you lost weight, you got married, you're happy. Okay. It lasts for a certain period of time. Nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly fine. But can you be happy if you're sitting at a funeral, right? You're sitting at your mother's funeral. Can you be happy? I don't think you can really be happy. So I like to think of it in terms of peace rather than happiness, right? So you have an event, you're happy, that's fine, right? And you can't be happy when something bad necessarily might happen, because you may be in a situation where you have to grieve or what have you, but you can still be at peace when you're at your mother's funeral, as an example. So embrace all of life.
Julius, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and taking the time out of your day.
I appreciate getting to talk to you.